What happens when one of the world's fastest growing economies suddenly decides to pull the plug on a major trade channel with the United States? That's exactly the shockwave hitting global markets right now. India, often seen as Washington's long-term strategic partner in Asia, has just made a stunning move, cutting off key engineering goods from flowing to the U.S. For decades, India's role as a reliable supplier of engineering components, everything from machine parts to specialized industrial equipment, helped fuel American industries. But this sudden no from New Delhi is raising eyebrows in Washington, rattling U.S. importers, and sparking questions about whether this is just a trade dispute or the beginning of something far more serious. Is this India flexing its muscles in a shifting world order? Is it a calculated response to U.S. trade policies, tariffs, or perhaps political pressure? Or is it about India sending a clear message? We're no longer dependent, and we won't play by old rules. The ripple effects could be massive, not just for American manufacturers, but for global supply chains already stretched thin. Stay tuned, because this story could reshape how America and India do business for years to come. India's decision to cut off exports of certain engineering goods to the United States is more than a headline. It's a turning point. The U.S. has long considered India not just a trading partner, but also a counterbalance to China's growing influence in Asia. Engineering goods may not sound glamorous, but they are the backbone of industrial growth. From automobile parts to heavy machinery, precision tools, and specialized components, these are the quiet essentials that keep factories running, construction projects moving, and innovation alive. For decades, U.S. companies leaned on India's engineering sector for affordable, high-quality parts. This trade not only supported American industries, but also strengthened the economic ties between Washington and New Delhi. But now, India has effectively drawn a line in the sand, saying, enough. The reasons behind this decision are complex, ranging from U.S. tariffs and rising trade barriers to India's push for self-reliance and its growing confidence on the global stage. This moment matters because it comes at a time when supply chains are already under stress. Global inflation, energy shocks, and geopolitical rivalries have left economies vulnerable. The U.S., meanwhile, is doubling down on reshoring industries and reducing reliance on foreign suppliers. So, India's move doesn't just hurt trade, it raises questions about whether America is losing one of its closest allies in the global marketplace. At its heart, this story is about power, leverage, and a shifting balance. India is signaling that it won't simply follow Washington's lead. And for the U.S., the challenge is not just about replacing lost engineering goods, it's about rethinking how to maintain influence in a world where partners are acting more independently than ever before. Number 1. The immediate shock to American industry. The first and most visible impact of India's move is being felt inside American factories and workshops. Engineering goods may not always make headlines, but they form the hidden foundation of countless industries. Think about the auto industry. Those sleek cars rolling off assembly lines rely on specialized gears, bearings, precision-machined parts, and electrical components. Many of these were sourced from India, a country that built a reputation for delivering affordable, reliable, and high-quality engineering products. With the sudden cutoff, American manufacturers are now scrambling to fill the gap. Automakers, construction firms, and even aerospace suppliers are suddenly facing shortages. Without those Indian parts, production lines risk grinding to a halt or slowing down dramatically. Companies can try to replace Indian goods with parts from Southeast Asia or Latin America, but that takes time. Supply contracts don't just flip overnight, and quality standards must be rigorously checked. Meanwhile, importing from other regions is often more expensive. In short, American firms are bracing for higher costs, delivery delays, and in some cases, stalled projects. For everyday Americans, this industrial disruption has real consequences. Imagine infrastructure projects like road repairs or bridge construction being delayed because essential parts are missing. Or think of consumer goods, from cars to kitchen appliances, becoming more expensive as companies pass down their rising costs. This isn't just about trade statistics, it's about wallets and timelines, and those effects are about to be felt nationwide. Small and medium-sized businesses are particularly vulnerable. Unlike giant corporations with global supply networks, smaller firms often rely heavily on a single reliable source. For them, losing access to Indian engineering goods isn't just a headache. It could be a survival crisis. Some may struggle to keep up with orders, while others may be forced to shut down operations temporarily. What makes this shock even sharper is the timing. America is already navigating inflation pressures, a shifting global economy, and rising energy prices. Just when industries need stable supply chains to keep costs under control, one of their key suppliers has pulled out. The result is a domino effect. Shortages create delays. Delays raise costs, and costs fuel inflation. In this way, India's decision doesn't just disrupt American industry. It threatens to ripple through the broader U.S. economy, affecting jobs, growth, and consumer confidence. And Washington knows, finding a replacement won't be quick or easy. Number 2, India's Make in India push expanded at 144 words. To understand why India would take such a bold step, we need to look closely at its Make in India initiative. Launched in 2014, this program was designed to transform India from a service-oriented economy into a global manufacturing hub. The vision was simple, yet ambitious. Boost domestic production, attract foreign investment, and reduce reliance on imports and exports that made India vulnerable to global shocks. Over the years, Make in India has become a centerpiece of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's economic agenda, rallying industries, investors, and policymakers around the idea of national self-reliance. By cutting back engineering goods to the U.S. India is sending a powerful message. Its industrial base is no longer just a supplier for global markets, it's an engine for domestic growth. Rather than exporting crucial components, India wants to channel them into its own factories, its own construction sites, and its own infrastructure projects. With a growing middle class and massive investments in roads, railways, energy, and defense, India is making it clear that its first priority is to fuel its own rise. But the strategy goes beyond domestic needs. By limiting exports, New Delhi is also creating leverage. It is telling American firms, if you want access to Indian-made products, you should consider investing directly in India. This tactic isn't new. China used it for years, requiring foreign companies to set up local operations if they wanted to tap into Chinese markets. India, in its own way, is adopting a similar playbook, and it's working. Global companies are already eyeing India as a manufacturing alternative to China, especially after COVID-19 exposed the risks of overdependence on Beijing. Apple, Samsung, and dozens of other multinationals have expanded their production in India in recent years. By tightening exports, India is essentially accelerating that trend, pushing more companies to shift operations into the country rather than relying on imports. Politically, this move plays well at home. The Modi government has framed self-reliance as a matter of pride, sovereignty, and national security. In an age where trade wars and geopolitical rivalries dominate headlines, India is positioning itself as strong enough to stand alone, even when it means saying no to the United States. So, Make in India isn't just an economic policy, it's a statement of independence. Cutting engineering goods to the U.S. is both a strategic maneuver and a declaration. India will no longer define itself by what it provides to others, but by what it builds for itself. Number 3, U.S. trade policy backlash. Trade disputes between Washington and New Delhi are not new, but India's decision to cut off engineering goods highlights how those tensions are escalating into something bigger. For years, the U.S. has applied pressure on India to liberalize its economy, lower tariffs, open up sensitive markets, and give American companies greater access. But at the same time, Washington has imposed its own barriers on Indian exports. From steel tariffs under the Trump administration to ongoing disputes over digital services taxes and agricultural goods, India has often felt like the rules were stacked against it. Engineering goods are now the battleground where that frustration has boiled over. By pulling back exports, New Delhi is essentially saying, if you want to squeeze us, we'll squeeze back. It's a classic example of retaliatory trade politics, except this time it strikes at the heart of U.S. industry. Unlike disputes over mangoes or generic drugs, engineering goods are deeply integrated into American supply chains. That's why this feels less like a symbolic move and more like a direct challenge. The irony is that both sides publicly present themselves as strategic partners. The U.S. has called India a natural ally, especially in its Indo-Pacific strategy to counter China's rise. India, meanwhile, has welcomed defense cooperation and technology sharing with Washington. But beneath the surface, economic tensions have simmered. India has long resisted what it sees as unfair pressure from the U.S., and Washington has grown impatient with India's protectionist instincts. Cutting engineering exports makes that tension impossible to ignore. This backlash also raises questions about timing. The U.S. is heading into an election cycle where trade, manufacturing, and job creation are hot-button issues. Politicians will likely seize on India's move to argue that America is losing ground in global trade. Meanwhile, India's government will frame the decision as proof of its strength and independence, boosting domestic political capital. What makes this particularly dangerous is that it could escalate. The U.S. may respond with new tariffs or restrictions of its own, setting off a cycle of retaliation that pushes both countries further apart. Such a spiral wouldn't just damage trade, it would undermine the broader strategic partnership that both governments have spent years building. In short, this is more than a trade hiccup. It's a clear sign of India's willingness to push back against U.S. pressure, and a reminder that even allies can clash when national interests collide. Number 4. The China factor. Whenever trade relations between India and the United States hit turbulence, one question immediately arises. What does this mean for China? After all, Beijing looms large over both countries' foreign policy and economic strategies. If India restricts its engineering exports to the U.S., the ripple effects could open the door for China to step in, either as a replacement supplier or as a new economic partner for India. That possibility is what makes Washington nervous. For decades, the U.S. has invested heavily in building India as a counterweight to China. The idea was simple. If Washington could deepen trade and defense ties with New Delhi, it could strengthen a democratic ally in Asia that could balance Beijing's growing influence. But when India makes moves that create friction with the U.S., it risks undermining that strategy. Beijing, always alert to opportunities, could exploit the rift. For instance, China could offer India favorable trade deals on machinery, raw materials, or infrastructure cooperation, softening the blow of reduced U.S. ties. Of course, India is no friend of China. The two countries have clashed militarily on their disputed Himalayan border, and India has been wary of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, which it views as a way for China to dominate smaller nations economically. Yet, history shows that economic necessity can sometimes override political rivalry. If Indian industries feel squeezed because of lost U.S. markets, Chinese suppliers might quietly step in to fill certain gaps. This wouldn't erase hostility between New Delhi and Beijing, but it could create an uncomfortable interdependence that weakens Washington's influence. There's also the global optics. If India, widely seen as America's key democratic partner, in Asia, chooses to act independently or lean toward Beijing even slightly, it sends a signal to other nations. Countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia may conclude that aligning with the U.S. is optional, that they can play both sides or tilt toward China if it's economically advantageous. That undermines the broader U.S. strategy of building a coalition against Beijing. From India's perspective, keeping China as both a competitor and a fallback option is smart diplomacy. It increases leverage with Washington while ensuring India never feels cornered. For the U.S., though, this creates a dilemma. How do you keep India on your side without looking weak or giving away too much? That's the strategic puzzle the Biden administration or any future U.S. administration will have to solve. Ultimately, the China factor makes this trade dispute more than a bilateral issue. It transforms it into a test of global alignments, where every move India makes shifts the balance in the world's most important geopolitical rivalry. Number 5. global supply chains at risk. The last, and perhaps most far-reaching consequence of India's decision is its impact on global supply chains. To understand why, we need to remember that the modern economy runs on interconnected networks where parts are made in one country, assembled in another, and sold in yet another. A disruption in one link, like India's withdrawal of engineering goods, can ripple across continents, creating bottlenecks that affect industries far removed from the original dispute. Take Europe, for example. Many European firms rely on both U.S. and Indian suppliers for critical industrial parts. If the U.S. suddenly struggles to source engineering goods, European companies that import from America could also face shortages. The same applies to African and Southeast Asian nations that depend on U.S.-based firms for equipment. In other words, India's no to Washington doesn't stop at American borders. It reverberates across the global economy. We've seen this pattern before. When COVID-19 shut down factories in China, the world quickly discovered just how fragile supply chains really are. Shelves emptied, prices soared, and governments scrambled to secure medical equipment and electronics. India's decision may not be as all-encompassing, but it follows the same logic. When a major player withholds goods, the ripple effects expose vulnerabilities that many assumed were manageable. What makes this situation especially sensitive is timing. Global supply chains are already under stress from multiple fronts. The war in Ukraine disrupting energy and grain markets, climate-related events straining agricultural production, and geopolitical rivalries leading to new trade blocs. India's cutback adds yet another pressure point at the worst possible moment. Businesses that were hoping for stability in 2025 may instead find themselves facing another round of shortages, delays, and price hikes. For multinational corporations, this means hard choices. Do they double down on India, setting up local manufacturing facilities to avoid future restrictions? Do they diversify further into other emerging economies like Vietnam, Indonesia, or Mexico? Or do they bring production back home, accepting higher costs in exchange for predictability? Each option reshapes global trade in different ways, and none are quick fixes. For governments, the challenge is equally daunting. Washington must now weigh how to secure its supply chains without alienating India further. Meanwhile, other countries are watching closely. If India succeeds in prioritizing its domestic industries without suffering serious consequences, more nations may follow suit, choosing self-reliance over global interdependence. In short, this isn't just a trade spat, it's a warning shot to the entire global economy. The era of easy, seamless supply chains may be fading, replaced by a world where national interest comes first and cooperation comes second. That shift will shape not just U.S. India relations, but the very structure of global trade in the years ahead.